Beneath an ordinary town in central Turkey lies a city that was never meant to be seen. A city carved deep into volcanic rock. A city of tunnels, storerooms, wells, kitchens, stables, churches, and enormous stone doors. Its name is Derinkuyu, and for centuries, much of it remained hidden beneath the ground. From the surface, Derinkuyu does not look like the entrance to an ancient underground world. It looks like a quiet town in Cappadocia. But beneath its streets lies one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites ever discovered. A vast underground complex descending roughly 85 meters below the earth. At least 18 levels have been identified. Not every level is open to visitors, and not every passage has been fully explored. But what has been uncovered is already astonishing. This was not simply a cave. It was not a small shelter. It was an underground city, a place designed to hold large numbers of people during times of danger. The question is simple. Why would anyone build an entire city beneath the earth? To understand Derinkuyu, we need to understand the strange land above it. Cappadocia is famous for its surreal landscape. Tall rock formations rise from the valleys like stone towers. Cliffs are filled with carved rooms. Ancient homes appear inside hillsides. Hidden churches lie behind narrow passageways. The unusual landscape was created by volcanoes. Millions of years ago, eruptions covered this region with ash. Over time, the ash hardened into a soft volcanic stone called tuff. Tuff is easy enough to carve with simple tools, but when left in thick layers, it can also form stable walls and underground chambers. Ancient communities understood the value of this stone. They carved homes into cliffs. They made storage rooms beneath the ground. They built monasteries inside valleys. And eventually, they created places where entire communities could disappear from the world above. Derinkuyu may not have been built in one single period. Its earliest origins remain debated. Some researchers have linked its oldest spaces to ancient Anatolian peoples. Others have suggested that early underground chambers may have been used during Persian rule. Later generations almost certainly expanded the site. Romans, Byzantine communities, and medieval inhabitants all lived in this region at different times. That means Derinkuyu was likely shaped over centuries, perhaps even over more than 1,000 years. One generation carved a room, another extended a tunnel, another improved a ventilation shaft, another added a defensive stone door. The underground city became a layered record of survival. In the modern era, Derinkuyu was rediscovered almost by accident. In the 1960s, a local resident was working on his home. During renovations, a wall was opened. Behind it was a hidden space, then a passage, then more rooms, and then tunnels leading far beneath the town. What first appeared to be a small hidden chamber turned out to be part of something much larger. Archaeologists began investigating. Slowly, the scale of Derinkuyu emerged. The city stretched deep underground. It contained spaces for daily life. There were kitchens. There were food storage rooms. There were areas where grapes may have been pressed. There were spaces for animals. There were religious rooms. There were gathering areas. And there were ventilation shafts reaching down through the rock. The deeper archaeologists looked, the more remarkable it became. This was not a place built for a single family. It was built for a community that expected danger, a community that planned for life without sunlight, and a community that understood that survival might depend on vanishing beneath the earth. But Derinkuyu was not merely a dark maze of tunnels. It had organization. The upper levels contained spaces that would have been useful for everyday survival. Storage rooms were placed close to entrances. Animals could be kept in stables. Food could be prepared in kitchens. Families could gather in living areas. As people moved deeper into the city, the passages became narrower. The air became colder. The darkness became complete. There was no sky, no horizon, no easy way to know whether it was day or night. And yet, people may have remained down there for long periods. Not because they wanted to, but because the world above had become too dangerous. An underground city cannot survive without air. That was one of Derinkuyu's greatest challenges. Deep below the surface, oxygen becomes a matter of life and death. Without ventilation, the city would have been impossible to use. But Derinkuyu had a complex system of shafts carved through the stone. A central ventilation shaft carried fresh air down into the lower levels. Smaller openings connected different sections of the city. The builders understood how air moved underground. They knew that even the deepest rooms needed to breathe. Some shafts also connected to wells. This gave people access to water below ground. In a time of attack, that was essential. If every journey for water required leaving the city, the refuge would quickly become useless. But Derinkuyu was designed so that people could remain hidden, at least for a time. Imagine what that moment might have looked like. Above ground, an army approaches. Smoke rises in the distance. People hear horses. They hear shouting. They gather food. They bring tools. They lead animals toward the entrances. Then entire families disappear beneath the earth. The passages are sealed. The stone doors roll into place, and the town above becomes silent. One of the most famous features of Derinkuyu is its massive stone doors. These were not ordinary doors with hinges. They were giant circular slabs of stone. Some were large enough to block an entire tunnel. They could be rolled from inside the underground city. Once in position, they made the passage extremely difficult to enter. Many had small holes in their centers. These openings may have allowed people inside to watch the tunnel beyond the door. They may also have helped defenders protect the entrance. The doors were part of a larger defensive strategy. The tunnels were often narrow. That was intentional. A narrow tunnel prevented large groups of attackers from rushing inside together. Anyone entering would have to move slowly, often one person at a time. They would be in darkness. They would not know the route, and they would face people defending their own hidden city. Derinkuyu was built for survival. But who were its people hiding from? Cappadocia stood at a crossroads of ancient empires. For thousands of years, armies passed through Anatolia. The region saw Persian influence, then Greek and Roman power, then Byzantine rule. Later, Arab raids and other invasions brought new dangers. The people of Cappadocia lived in a land where political control could change again and again. For them, invasion was not an abstract idea. It was a recurring threat. Underground cities provided a possible refuge, a place to hide food, a place to protect families, a place to wait until danger had passed. In later centuries, Christian communities in Cappadocia may have used underground spaces during periods of conflict. But Derinkuyu's history is probably more complicated than any single explanation. The same passages may have been used by different people in different eras. The same rooms may have served new purposes as circumstances changed. That is why the site remains difficult to explain completely. It is not frozen in one moment of time. It is a living record of adaptation. Some estimates claim that Derinkuyu could have sheltered up to 20,000 people. That number is often repeated, but it should be treated carefully. The true capacity is difficult to prove. It would depend on how much of the city was usable at one time, how much food and water had been stored, how long people stayed underground, and whether animals were being kept inside as well. Still, even if the highest estimate is uncertain, the scale is undeniable. Derinkuyu could support far more people than a simple shelter. It was designed for a whole community. Perhaps thousands of people could have taken refuge there during an emergency. The city contained evidence of organized life. Storage areas suggest preparation. Stables suggest that animals were valuable enough to protect. Food production spaces suggest people expected to remain underground for more than a few hours. Religious rooms suggest that faith continued even beneath the earth. In the darkness of Derinkuyu, survival was not only physical. It was also social. Families needed each other. Communities needed order. People needed food, water, air, and hope. The underground city was not a fantasy world. It was a practical response to fear, and that is what makes it so powerful. It was built by people who believed that, one day, the safest place in the world might be beneath their own feet. The deeper you go into Derinkuyu, the stranger the city becomes. The upper levels make sense immediately. There are spaces for food, animals, storage, daily life. But lower down, the tunnels become more confined. The darkness becomes heavier. The air feels colder. Every wall is stone. Every turn leads deeper into the earth. For people hiding there during a crisis, the experience must have been intense. Children may have waited underground with their families. People may have slept in chambers without daylight. They may have listened for footsteps above. They may have waited days, perhaps weeks, hoping for signs that it was safe to return to the surface. And Derinkuyu was not alone. Cappadocia contains many underground settlements. Some are small, others are extensive. Nearby, Cappadocia is another famous underground city. It also contains tunnels, storage spaces, ventilation systems, and defensive features. Together, these sites show that underground living was not an isolated experiment. It was part of a wider survival strategy. Across Cappadocia, communities learned to use the volcanic stone beneath them. They built a hidden world below the visible one. A world of tunnels, rooms, wells, stone doors, and secrets. Some claims suggest that underground cities across the region were once connected by long tunnels. A few tunnels do extend significant distances, but the idea of one giant underground kingdom, fully connected beneath Cappadocia, is more dramatic than the evidence currently proves. The confirmed sites are already remarkable enough. They show skilled planning, they show engineering knowledge, and they show how people adapted to a dangerous world. For modern visitors, Derinkuyu can feel almost impossible. How did ancient builders organize such a complex structure without modern machinery? How did they prevent collapses? How did they move rock out of the tunnels? How did they keep air moving to the deepest levels? How did they manage food, animals, water, and thousands of frightened people? The answer is probably not lost super technology. It was human knowledge built slowly over generations. The builders understood the rock. They knew which areas could be carved safely. They knew how to create shafts for air and water. They knew how to make narrow tunnels difficult for invaders to enter. And they learned from the people who came before them. Derinkuyu was not built through magic. It was built through necessity, through patience, through skill, and through the constant fear of what might happen above ground. That may make it more powerful than any legend. This was not a monument built to impress visitors. It was not a palace built to display wealth. It was a city built because people believed they might need to disappear. Today, Derinkuyu reminds us that history is not always found in palaces, temples, or battlefields. Sometimes, history is hidden beneath a home, behind a wall, at the end of a narrow staircase. Sometimes, the greatest achievements of the past were built not to be seen, but to keep people alive. The stone doors still stand. The tunnels still descend. The ventilation shafts still reach through the darkness. And the rooms beneath Derinkuyu are still waiting. They are evidence of a time when people prepared for the worst. A time when an entire community could vanish underground. Not forever, but long enough to survive. Perhaps that is the true mystery of Derinkuyu. Not how ancient people carved a city beneath the earth, but what kind of world made them believe they had to. This is Derinkuyu, the underground city built to survive the world above. And it remains one of the forgotten past's greatest mysteries. Stay curious.